Hi, today I am talking about the book The Perfect Date by R.L. Stine. This is one of his Fear Street books. So I think R.L. Stine is definitely most known for being the author of Goosebumps. The Fear Street books are similar to Goosebumps, but they are young adult. So they are about teenagers, and they are, from my understanding, a lot more mature, a lot more graphic, definitely a lot more graphic, I'll get into that, than Goosebumps. I know with Goosebumps he likes to not include certain things from the real world to help kids understand that it's fantasy so that they don't get too scared from it, but with Fear Street, it definitely can be more intense. I knew about Goosebumps when I was younger, but I never read any of the books until last year when I was talking with some friends and they liked the books. So I have read 2 Goosebumps books at the moment. I've had multiple recommended to me, and I do definitely plan on reading more. The 2 that I've read are, the first one was The Cuckoo Clock of Doom. That one I thought was okay. I definitely didn't think it was poorly written, but just overall the story and stuff wasn't my favorite. But then I read Welcome to Camp Nightmare, and I even did a review on that one, which I wasn't planning on doing because I thought it was just a little story. Not that I never review shorter stories, but I just didn't plan on it. But I really enjoyed that one. I thought it was really good. It was so good I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I still think about it sometimes that I ended up making a review of it. So I really enjoyed that one. I definitely plan on reading some more. More recently, I have learned about the Fear Street series. This particular book I heard about from the channel An Autistic Reader. She has reviewed some of the books in this series. And I believe this is number 37 in the original Fear Street books. But like Goosebumps, I think it's the kind of thing where you don't have to read them in order. They're just a collection of stories that have nothing to do with each other. I just know in the case of Fear Street, because I think Goosebumps takes place wherever, but I think Fear Street takes place in the same general area, but ultimately they're stories that have nothing to do with each other. When I watched An Autistic Reader's review of this, I thought it sounded interesting. Plus, this particular book was published in 1999, and this is actually a first edition, which is pretty neat. I'll get more into why that's particularly important later in this video, but I enjoy reading things that took place more in the past. Some people, I might be making them feel really old, but I was not alive back then. So I think it's interesting to read about the time and the technology and everything. I personally enjoy it, and I don't think anything is like too old for me. I'm not gonna be like, oh, that takes place in the past, I don't want to read it. So this particular Fear Street book, The Perfect Date, is about a teenager named Brady, and the beginning of the book, and the synopsis talks about this so I can mention it, he and his girlfriend are sledding, and there's an accident, and she ends up dying. And that's the prologue, and then the story continues about a year later, and then Brady meets this new girl named Rosha who catches his attention at a diner. They don't go to the same school, and he is instantly very interested in her. He thinks she's very attractive, he likes her voice and everything about her, so he talks to her, and then they form a relationship. And this book is pretty much about their relationship, but some of the circumstances with her are kind of strange, kind of makes you wonder if there's like something supernatural going on, definitely the kind of thing that you might be curious about. Brady has also been having this girl with a really scarred face following him around and like giving him warnings, and so he doesn't know what's up with that. His best friend John is like not very trusting of Rosha and is telling him that like he should be careful around her and stuff. So yeah, Brady meets Rosha. They get into a relationship pretty quickly, and there's the scarred girl following him around and freaking him out. That's pretty much what this book is about. I mean, you can see that it's not very long. I think all the Fear Street books are probably around that length, less than 200 pages. So now I'm going to tell you some things I liked and didn't like about this book. So first of all, I found Brady to be quite the unlikable main character, but I thought maybe that's the point. I don't know if all the main characters in the Fear Street books are unlikable, but he was just like the kind of guy who would just easily go from one girl to the next. In fact, Rosha, you learn this early on, like he's cheating on his current girlfriend with Rosha, so he just has like no regard for that. And even at the beginning of the book, he and his best friend are talking at the diner right before he spots Rosha about other girls. So yeah, he definitely is one of those, but I thought maybe that was the point. Maybe he was supposed to be unlikable. I did think that it was interesting getting his perspective. I mean, it's in third person, but you can hear some of his like thoughts and feelings. It was interesting when it's a character who lies and hides things because you get to see what they truly think and what they're actually doing. So that was a little interesting. I kind of felt that way when I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That was interesting, but I still didn't like things about him. But I was kind of just watching the story happen to him. I found that this book was well written and easy to follow along with. It's descriptive, but doesn't drag on with anything. I think that sentences don't always need to be so complicated anyway. It was fast-paced and had short chapters. I don't feel that it wasted any space. Like I said, it's pretty short, but I also feel like some things, maybe the author could have gone more in depth with it, but it wasn't like there were 0 emotions described or anything like that. So like it could have been a little longer, but this was the point. This is how long you wanted it to be, so that's how it is. As I said, I enjoyed the time period based on when this was written, with things like looking through a phone book and trying to find someone's number. I think there was definitely a mystery aspect to this, and some of it was quite thrilling and suspenseful, mostly at the beginning and then at the end, but there is some stuff in the middle here and there. I think a lot of the stuff that happens in the middle is pretty tame, but still is connected to everything and leads up to everything. I enjoyed the drama. I thought this was a fun story, especially because there wasn't a whole lot to it, so it wasn't like there were parts that really just dragged on. And I like that. I think if there's nothing to put in there, if it's not relevant to the story, then maybe it doesn't need to be in there. And this book definitely got quite graphic and disturbing at times. I'm assuming this is probably going to be a thing with Fear Street. Maybe they won't all be this graphic, but I know that Goosebumps would probably never get as graphic as this did because that is for younger audiences. But this book definitely had some quite graphic and disturbing things where I was like, oh, that's gross or really disturbing. So yeah, I mean, it is a horror. I felt that Brady's infatuation with Rosha, even though it's kind of like the whole point, did get a bit repetitive and annoying at times. Like she was the only thing that mattered. Something terrible could happen to him somewhere else, and he would think about it for like maybe a paragraph, and then like, oh well, back to Rosha, gotta find her, gotta talk to her. So yeah, he was like really down bad for her, as they would say. That's probably not how they would have said it in 1996 when this book was published, but that's how I'm describing him. The ending kind of didn't make sense, and that seems to be one of the biggest complaints I saw on Goodreads. I don't know if all the Fear Street books are like this or they're meant to be wacky and nonsensical, but at the same time, they felt like real people. They've got, you know, real live action people on the cover, so that's how I imagined it, not as like a cartoon. But yeah, the ending kind of didn't make much sense. And even though this is a spoiler-free review, if you want to talk about the ending and include spoilers, you can. Maybe just mark your comments so say it has spoilers, or make it so where you gotta click read more so that I can see it, so that other people don't have to see spoilers if they don't want them. But yeah, we can absolutely talk about it. That always applies. But yeah, the ending, it was like, stuff was revealed, but like some of it didn't really make sense. It wasn't really explained. I wasn't quite sure how I felt about the ending. If you want my more specific thoughts on things to do with the ending and things about Brady and just the book in general, my review on Goodreads is a spoiler review. It is marked as containing spoilers, so I went a little more in detail on there. Usually my Goodreads reviews don't have spoilers, but I just wanted to get into it on there since I can mark it that way. There's a link to my Goodreads profile in the description. You should be able to click on that. If it doesn't work, let me know. So if you want to hear my more specific thoughts on this book, you can go there. Overall, I did enjoy this book. I thought it was fun, especially because it was kind of light. I mean, not in terms of the content, some of it was quite dark, as I said, but like there just wasn't a lot to it, so it wasn't like something super complicated or intellectual. I don't think it was bad. I don't think it was poorly written. I enjoyed it. I didn't particularly love the ending, but I guess it wasn't bad, just more baffling than anything. But yeah, I liked this. I enjoyed it while I was reading it. I didn't absolutely love it. It wasn't like the best thing I ever read. Far from it, but I still enjoyed it. I'd give it 4 stars. If you've read this book or any other Fear Street or R.L. Stine books, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You know, if you have any recommendations for certain ones I should read. I borrowed this from the library, and my library system has some other Fear Street books, so I plan on checking out some more, definitely. I don't know if all the Fear Street books are kind of weird and nonsensical at the end. Maybe they are. Maybe I should get used to that. One more thing I wanted to talk about. So as I said, this is a first edition of the book. I'm glad I read a first edition because I saw on Goodreads people talking about newer versions being like modernized, which is a topic I want to get into in this video. Basically, like, people on Goodreads were saying that in a newer edition, the characters were telling Alexa to play Billie Eilish, and yeah, I'm gonna address that because what? This isn't the first time I've heard about books changing something, either because it could be seen as offensive, which it wasn't the case for this, or because they just want to change it, which I definitely disagree with. And I have heard about stuff to do with that with R.L. Stine's books, and I heard that like I don't know about this book specifically, probably not, but I heard that he like didn't even have a say in it. They just went ahead and did that. Like this book, I don't think it even mentions any specific musical artist. And even if it did, so what? That's when the book was published. It could be a way for kids to learn about someone new. There was a scene where they were listening to music, so I think I know what scene they were talking about. But that's kind of wild to me. You should only be fixing like typos or anything like that in newer editions. So there weren't any artists mentioned, so why Billie Eilish had to be mentioned, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. She wasn't even alive yet when this book was published. And this book is so 90s beyond that. Look at their clothes. And Brady looks through the phone book. I mean, yeah, I was doing that in the 2010s, but it wasn't the only option. Brady was a little limited compared to us. So it just made no sense to me. Maybe to appeal to a younger audience, and I still disagree with it because that's not what is originally in the book. So yeah, I'd definitely like to hear your thoughts on doing things like that in books. It's probably more common in children's books, I would imagine, just to maybe make it appeal to them more, but it didn't make sense, especially when this was written, and I think it's unnecessary, especially if it's done without the author's consent. So yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of that, but I have seen it before. I don't have specific examples on a sentence level, but where I do remember seeing that before is in The Fudge books by Judy Blume. Now these are newer editions. I'm not quite sure when these are from. I know that because I've read these books before, like a school library and stuff, before getting my own copies, and I know I've read older editions. Okay, so I'm not sure when these editions were printed, but I think I got this set in 2020. But I remember reading these then, and I think there were like things that were mentioned that weren't there before. I will try to look through them. They're not very long. Maybe I can find something. I do remember seeing things that were mentioned that maybe based on the year it was published didn't make sense. And maybe in this case it isn't as bad. I still disagree with it, but maybe it isn't as bad because like, I don't know if these books were like definitely from the time they were published in compared to Perfect Date, which was pretty 90s in my opinion. So I can understand, especially because it's for kids, maybe you want to make it more appealing, but I again still think it's unnecessary. But I'm going to look through something and see if I can find it because I feel like I've seen at least one thing. Okay, I found something. This probably isn't the only instance, and it ultimately doesn't take away from the book too much, so it doesn't bother me too much, especially because it wasn't like a whole pop star mentioned. Just technology, which is a little different. It definitely doesn't ruin the book for me, but it's still something worth noting, especially in the case of this, because I felt that in The Perfect Date, it was just an absurd occurrence. So in otherwise known as Sheila the Great, which was originally published in 1972, I was looking through it and it does mention a CD player, which I'm pretty sure wasn't a thing then. And there's probably more throughout the Fudge series. I don't know. I tried looking through a couple of them. I feel like maybe in one of them I saw like a video game console or something mentioned that wasn't around when the book was published. Just little things like that. That's not as big of a deal for me, especially if people in charge of the books want them to be a little more relatable. They want the books to be more modern just because they're about kids and kids are going to read them. So I kind of get that. I still wouldn't like it if it were me, but yeah. Now I will say another example by the same author where I actually feel like the modernization is acceptable. So in Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which was originally published in 1970, this book has a lot to do with periods, menstruation, all that. In this book, which is a newer edition, this is from like 2014 or something, this book does have an example of being more modernized that I'm actually okay with. Because originally, because I've read older editions of this, they would talk about like I don't even remember what it was called, something to do with a belt or something, which is something that used to be used for periods. In this book, Margaret just talks about pads, which makes sense because that's what we have now. The thing that they were talking about in previous editions was like something that's not used anymore today, and I couldn't even remember what it was called, but it was something that they used to use. I'm okay with that because periods are still something that is relevant, so it makes sense to change it. So it made sense to change the technology, tools, whatever you want to call them, to what would actually be used now, especially if you're giving this to someone who is going through that. So yeah, that makes sense, and that's the only example I can think of where I feel that it's justifiable. So yeah, I just wanted to go on that little tangent there to give my thoughts on that. Thought it would be relevant to talk about it based on what I've heard about newer editions of The Perfect Date. I'm glad I read a first edition. Let me know your thoughts on that when things like that are changed in books, especially when it's completely unnecessary, or if you feel like it actually helps, makes it more relevant, does it really make a difference to the kids? Let me know. Let me know if you have any examples like I do with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. If there are any examples of modernization in books that you feel are actually justifiable or reasonable or even better. Let me know if you have any examples of that. In the future, I will definitely be reading more Fear Street books and more Goosebumps books. I'll probably be reading some more Fear Street books quite soon. Yeah, thank you for watching.